The small colony of Haven was quiet, nestled on the outskirts of human-controlled space. Its people were accustomed to the humdrum of their isolated lives, far from the bustling trade routes or the threats of galactic war. Ethan Ryder, a skilled but unassuming engineer, spent his days repairing old machinery and dreaming of a world beyond the dusty skies of Haven. It was a day like any other when the sky above the colony blazed with fire. A massive alien craft, scared and smoking, broke through the clouds and crash-landed just outside the colony's perimeter. The ground shook with the impact, sending a wave of panic through Haven's residents. Ethan, ever the curious one, grabbed his tools and headed toward the crash site. "Stay back, Ethan," a voice called from behind. It was Marla, the colony's leader, her face pale with worry. "We don't know what's out there." "I'll just take a look," Ethan replied, adjusting his tool belt. "If it's dangerous, I'll come back. But if someone needs help, we can't just leave them out there." When Ethan reached the crash site, he was struck by the sheer scale of the ship. Its sleek design was unlike anything he'd seen before, a testament to an advanced civilization. The air crackled with residual energy, and the smell of burnt metal was overwhelming. The ship's main hatch hissed open, and Ethan instinctively took a step back, his heart racing. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall, poised, and undeniably regal. She had pale blue skin that shimmered faintly under the sunlight and long, flowing white hair that seemed almost ethereal. Her eyes, a piercing silver, scanned the surroundings with a mix of caution and authority. Ethan froze. He had never seen anyone, or anything, like her before. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling but steady enough to show he wasn't afraid. The woman raised her chin, her tone commanding yet oddly calm. "I am Valora, Queen of the Zerithian Star Empire. My ship was ambushed. We need assistance." Ethan blinked. A queen. Here, on Haven. It was almost too much to process. Still, he noticed her stagger slightly as she stepped forward, her left arm clutching her side. Without thinking, he moved closer. "You're hurt," he said, his voice softening. "Let me help." Valora's gaze fixed on him, calculating. She was not accustomed to relying on strangers, least of all humans, creatures often dismissed by the greater galactic powers. But there was something different about this one. His eyes held no malice, only a genuine concern. "I will accept your aid," she said at last, though her tone suggested it was more an allowance than a request. Ethan nodded, stepping forward to support her. Her skin felt cool to the touch, almost like marble, but there was a strength beneath it that belied her fragile appearance. He guided her to a shaded area near the wreckage, setting her down gently. "I'll get you some water and supplies," Ethan said, pulling a canteen from his bag. "Do you have others with you?" Valora hesitated. They did not survive. Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of grief beneath her words. Ethan nodded, choosing not to press further. "I'll do what I can to fix your ship, but it might take time. Your technology is, well, it's way beyond what we've got here." Valora studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You surprise me, human. Few would show kindness without expecting something in return." Ethan chuckled softly. "Guess you've been meeting the wrong humans." For the first time, Valora's lips curved into a faint smile. It was fleeting, but it was there. As Ethan worked on the ship, Valora watched him carefully. She had expected hostility, fear, or even indifference, but Ethan's earnestness intrigued her. In this unremarkable human, she saw something she hadn't encountered in a long time: hope. Little did they know, this encounter would change both their lives forever. Ethan spent the better part of the evening tinkering with Valora's damaged ship. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he studied the advanced machinery, his hands working on cables and panels that looked like something out of a dream. "This is insane," he muttered to himself, staring at the glowing circuits that pulsed faintly under his touch. "How does this even work?" Valora sat nearby, her silver eyes tracking his movements. Her posture was regal even in her weakened state, her pale blue skin catching the light of Haven's setting sun. She had spent her life surrounded by the best engineers of her empire, yet watching this human work stirred a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "You have no formal training in Zerithian technology," Velora said, breaking the silence. "And yet you proceed as though you understand it." Ethan paused, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I don't understand it," he admitted with a grin. "But machines have a way of talking to you if you listen hard enough. This part here," he pointed to a cluster of wires, "looks like it's connected to your power system. If I can reroute the energy, we might get some basic functions running again." Velora raised an eyebrow. "You speak of machines as if they are alive." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe not alive, but they're predictable. People, on the other hand." His voice trailed off, and he focused back on the wires. Velora tilted her head, intrigued by his perspective. Humans had always been dismissed by her empire as primitive and chaotic, but this one seemed different. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Velora shifted slightly, wincing in pain. Ethan noticed and immediately set his tools aside, grabbing a small medkit from his bag. "You're still hurt," he said, kneeling beside her. "Let me take a look." Velora hesitated. Zerithian queens were taught to show strength at all times, never revealing weakness, especially not to outsiders. But there was something disarming about Ethan's sincerity. She nodded reluctantly, pulling back the fabric of her tunic to reveal a deep gash along her side. Ethan sucked in a breath. "That's nasty," he said, opening the medkit. "This might sting a little." Velora watched him work, his hand steady as he cleaned the wound and applied a bandage. His touch was gentle, and she found herself relaxing despite the pain. "You are skilled in healing as well," she remarked. Ethan chuckled. "Not really. I just know enough to keep people alive. Haven doesn't have a fancy hospital, so we make do." Velora's expression softened. "Your resourcefulness is admirable." Ethan smiled. "Coming from a queen, I'll take that as a compliment." Just as he finished wrapping the bandage, a distant rumble echoed through the air. Velora's head snapped up, her expression suddenly alert. "They found me," she said, her voice low. Ethan frowned. "Who's they?" "The rebels," Velora explained. "They seek to overthrow my rule. If they capture me, they will not hesitate to kill anyone who helped me." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Then we need to get you out of here." Velora shook her head. "My ship cannot fly in its current state. They will be here before we can finish repairs." Ethan stood, his mind racing. "Then we'll hide. There's an old storage bunker near the edge of the colony. They'll never find us there." Velora hesitated. She was not used to relying on others, especially not a human. But there was no time to argue. "Lead the way," she said. Ethan grabbed her hand, helping her to her feet. Together, they moved quickly through the darkening landscape, the faint hum of enemy ships growing louder in the distance. As they reached the bunker, Ethan opened the heavy door and ushered Velora inside. He could see the worry in her eyes, but there was also a flicker of trust. For the first time in her life, Velora realized she couldn't face this alone. And to her surprise, she didn't want to. The hum of the ships passed overhead, fading into the night. Inside the bunker, Ethan and Velora exchanged a glance. "You're safe now," Ethan said softly. For the briefest moment, Velora allowed herself to believe him. The air in the bunker was cool and damp, the walls lined with old crates and forgotten tools from Haven's earlier days. Ethan paced back and forth, his mind racing with plans to keep Velora safe. She sat quietly on a makeshift seat, her silver eyes following his movements, a faint tension visible on her pale blue features. "What's the plan now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty of their situation. Ethan stopped and scratched the back of his head. "First, we wait for those ships to leave. Then I'll sneak back to your ship and see if I can scavenge more parts, if I can get the engine online." "You risked too much," Velora interrupted, her tone sharp but not unkind. The rebels will not spare you if they find you meddling with my ship. Ethan smiled faintly. Well, I'm not exactly on their Christmas list anyway. Besides, you're not just anyone, are you? You're a queen. If keeping you alive means risking a little, I'll take that chance. Valora was silent for a moment, her expression unreadable. Few had ever spoken to her with such straightforward honesty, and it unsettled her. You speak as though my life holds great value, she said finally. Ethan crouched in front of her, meeting her gaze. Doesn't it? You're fighting a war, trying to protect your people. That's got to mean something. Valora looked away, her hands clasping tightly together. You misunderstand, she said softly. This war, it is not just about my people. It is about me, my throne, my survival. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated, as though weighing whether or not to share the truth. But something in Ethan's unwavering gaze made her decide to trust him. In my empire, she began, her voice low, the queen is not just a ruler. She is a symbol, a living connection to the ancient bloodlines that bind our people together. If I fall, the unity of my empire falls with me. Ethan nodded slowly. So the rebels want to take you out to break that unity. Precisely, Valora said. And there is more. The throne I sit upon is not merely ceremonial. It is alive, in a sense. It chooses its ruler, and only the bloodline of the chosen queen can sit upon it. Without me, the rebels cannot claim the throne. That is why they pursue me so relentlessly. Ethan leaned back, his mind reeling. So you're saying if you die, your entire empire crumbles? Valora nodded, a flicker of pain crossing her face. Yes, my life is not my own, Ethan. It never has been. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Ethan finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. Sounds like a heavy burden. Valora's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in her expression. It is, she admitted. And yet, here I am, hiding in a bunker on a human colony, depending on a stranger for my survival. Ethan smiled faintly. Stranger or not, I'm here to help. You're not alone in this. Valora looked at him, her lips parting slightly as if to say something, but before she could, the faint hum of approaching ships echoed through the bunker. Ethan's face hardened. They're still looking, he muttered. We can't stay here much longer. Valora stood, her movements graceful despite her injuries. If they find us, you must leave me. Do not risk your life for mine. Ethan shot her a determined look. Not a chance. We're in this together. Her gaze softened, but she didn't argue. Deep down, she knew that Ethan's stubbornness might be the only thing keeping her alive. As the hum of the ships grew louder, Valora placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. If I survive this, she said quietly, I will owe you a debt that cannot be repaid. Ethan gave her a small grin. Let's make sure we both survive first. The two of them prepared for whatever came next, their fates now intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. The rumble of the rebel ships overhead made the air in the bunker feel heavier. Ethan could feel the tension radiating from Valora as she paced the small space, her movements sharp and deliberate, like a caged predator. They're getting closer, Ethan muttered, glancing toward the thick steel door that was their only protection. We need a plan. Fast. Valora stopped, her silver eyes narrowing as she thought. If they locate us, they will attack without hesitation. My people's enemies are ruthless. Ethan rubbed his chin, trying to stay calm despite the rising fear in his chest. Okay, so we don't let them find us. I've got a few decoy devices in my workshop. If I can get to them, we can lead their search away from here. You would risk exposing yourself for my sake? Valora asked, her voice carrying a mix of disbelief and gratitude. Ethan smiled faintly. I've come this far, haven't I? Valora studied him for a moment, her expression softening. You are unlike anyone I have ever known, Ethan Ryder. He gave her a small shrug, trying to hide his nervousness. Guess I'm just stubborn. Before Valora could respond, A sharp crack echoed through the air, a sound of something heavy landing nearby. Her face turned grim. They are deploying ground troops. Ethan's stomach twisted. Then we really don't have time to waste. Stay here. I'll be back as fast as I can. Valora grabbed his arm before he could leave. No. If you are caught, they will kill you. Ethan turned to face her, his green eyes steady. If I don't go, they'll find us anyway. We're out of options. For a moment, Valora's grip tightened, but then she let go, her expression conflicted. Be swift. And be careful. Ethan nodded and slipped out of the bunker, moving quickly but cautiously through the shadows. The colony was eerily silent, the faint hum of the rebel ships overhead the only sound. His workshop wasn't far, but every step felt like an eternity. When he finally reached the small building, he darted inside and began rummaging through his tools. He found the decoy devices, a set of small disc-shaped machines he had built to mimic electrical signals. With a little tweaking, they could create the illusion of movement, enough to draw the rebels away. As he worked, a shadow passed by the window. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. A rebel scout, clad in dark armor, was scanning the area with a glowing device in hand. Ethan gritted his teeth, staying perfectly still until the scout moved on. Once the coast was clear, he finished his adjustments and slipped out the back door, the decoy devices tucked under his arm. Back at the bunker, Valora was waiting anxiously, her sharp gaze flicking to the door the moment Ethan entered. You made it, she said, relief evident in her voice. Yeah, Ethan said, setting the devices on a crate. Now let's give them something to chase. He activated the first device, setting it to emit a signal that mimicked the energy signature of Valora's ship. Placing it in a small drone, he sent it flying toward the nearby hills. Valora watched as the drone disappeared into the distance, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Your ingenuity is remarkable, Ethan. Let's hope it's enough, he said, launching the second drone. Moments later, the hum of the rebel ships shifted, their searchlights turning toward the hills. Ethan let out a breath of relief. It's working. Valora stepped closer to him, her voice soft. You risk so much for someone you barely know. Why? Ethan glanced at her, his expression serious. Because it's the right thing to do. You might be a queen, but out here, you're just someone who needs help. And I help people. Valora's silver eyes lingered on him, her heart stirred by his simple yet profound words. You are truly extraordinary, Ethan Ryder. As the rebels moved farther from the bunker, the two of them shared a brief moment of calm, unaware of the even greater challenges that lay ahead. The decoy drones had worked. The rebel ships and ground troops had shifted their search to the hills, giving Ethan and Valora precious time to regroup. The bunker now felt less like a prison and more like a fragile sanctuary, holding two lives bound together by fate. Ethan leaned against the wall, his shirt stained with dirt and sweat. He looked over at Valora, who sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap. Even in the dim light of the bunker, her pale blue skin seemed to glow faintly, a testament to her otherworldly beauty. Looks like we bought ourselves a little time, Ethan said, breaking the silence. Valora nodded but didn't speak. Her gaze was distant, as though she were lost in thought. Ethan frowned. You okay? Valora hesitated before answering. I am. Unaccustomed to this. To what? To relying on others, she admitted, her voice tinged with vulnerability. In my empire, I am the one who provides strength, who leads. But here, I am dependent on you. It is unsettling. Ethan chuckled softly, leaning forward. Well, welcome to being human. We're all dependent on each other, whether we like it or not. Valora tilted her head, studying him. You say that as though it is a virtue. It is, Ethan replied. No one gets through life alone. Not really. Even a queen needs help sometimes. Her lips curved into a faint smile. You speak with such conviction, Ethan Ryder. Your simplicity is refreshing. He grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment." For a moment, the tension between them eased, replaced by a quiet warmth. Valora felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, a sense of comfort, of safety. She had spent her life surrounded by advisors, warriors, and sycophants, yet none had ever made her feel as understood as this human did. Ethan, too, was struck by the strangeness of the moment. He had never thought of himself as extraordinary, just a guy doing his best to get by. But with Valora, he felt like he was part of something bigger, something important. As the quiet stretched on, Valora broke it with a question. "Ethan, what drives you? What gives you purpose?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "That's a big question," he said, scratching the back of his head. "I guess I like fixing things. Whether it's machines, problems, or even people, it feels good to make things better." Valora considered his words, her silver eyes thoughtful. "A noble pursuit," she said. "And yet, you do so without expectation of reward. Why?" Ethan shrugged. "Because it's the right thing to do. I don't need a reward to help someone in need." Valora's gaze softened. "In my world, such selflessness is rare. It is admirable." He chuckled. "Guess humans have a few surprises up their sleeves." Before Valora could respond, a faint rumble echoed through the ground, jolting them both to attention. "They're still searching," Ethan said, his face hardening. Valora stood, her movements graceful and deliberate. "We cannot stay here much longer. They will eventually widen their search." Ethan nodded, grabbing his tools. "Then we'll move at first light. I'll head back to your ship and see what else I can salvage. If I can get the engine working, we'll have a real shot at getting out of here." Valora stepped closer to him, placing a hand on his arm. "Be careful, Ethan. Your courage is remarkable, but I do not wish for it to cost you your life." He met her gaze, his green eyes steady. "Don't worry about me. I've got a knack for surviving." Her hand lingered for a moment before she pulled away. "Then we must rest while we can. Tomorrow will demand much of us." As they settled into the quiet of the bunker, both felt the growing weight of their bond. Neither could say what the future held, but for the first time in their lives, they felt they would face it together. The night passed in uneasy silence, the hum of rebel ships faint in the distance, and though danger loomed closer with every passing hour, so too did the unspoken connection between Ethan and Valora, a bond that neither of them fully understood, but both knew was undeniable. The early light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the bunker's steel door. Ethan stirred from his restless sleep, stretching as he stood. Valora, already awake, sat quietly in a corner, her silver eyes fixed on the floor. She looked calm, but Ethan could sense the storm of thoughts behind her poised demeanor. "You've been up all night?" Ethan asked, his voice still rough from sleep. "I do not require as much rest as humans," Valora replied, her tone measured. "Besides, my mind is too troubled for sleep." Ethan sat across from her, leaning forward, worried about the rebels. Valora nodded slowly. "Yes, but there is more." She hesitated, then continued, "I fear for my people. Without me, the empire may fracture. The rebels offer chaos, not stability. Yet here I am, far from my throne, unable to fulfill my duty." Ethan studied her, his brow furrowed. "Sometimes doing the right thing means stepping back to see the bigger picture. You're here because you had no choice. Staying alive might be the only way to save your people." Valora's gaze met his, her expression softening. "You speak as though you have carried such burdens yourself." Ethan shrugged. "Not on your level, but I've had my share of tough choices. Out here, every decision feels like life or death. You learn to trust your gut." Before Valora could respond, the faint hum of rebel ships returned, louder this time. Ethan's face tightened. "Looks like they're back. We need to move." He gathered his tools, but Valora placed a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, "there is something you must know before we proceed." Ethan turned to her, his green eyes questioning. "What is it?" Valora straightened, her regal demeanor returning. If we are captured, the rebels will not only kill me, they will use my death to justify their rule. They will claim I was weak, unworthy, and that my line is ended. Ethan frowned. But your empire wouldn't just believe that, right? They'd fight back. Velora shook her head. My people's loyalty is tied to the throne, not to me as an individual. If the throne accepts another, even by force, they will follow. Ethan's jaw tightened. So they can just take your place if they kill you. That's messed up. It is our way, Velora said softly. But there is more. The rebels have devised a way to manipulate the throne's power. If they succeed, they will plunge my empire into darkness. Ethan's mind raced. He didn't fully understand the intricacies of Velora's world, but he didn't need to. What mattered was clear. If the rebels won, countless lives would be destroyed. Then we can't let them win, he said firmly. We'll fix your ship and get you out of here. You can regroup with your allies and fight back. Velora hesitated, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I fear it may already be too late. My empire may see my absence as a sign of defeat. Even if I return, I may not reclaim what I have lost. Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady. You're their queen. You don't give up, and neither do I. If there's even a chance to make things right, we take it. Velora stared at him, her heart stirred by his unwavering determination. You speak with the conviction of a warrior, she said quietly. Ethan grinned. Guess I'm just stubborn. The hum of the ships grew louder, pulling them back to the present. Ethan grabbed his pack and gestured toward the door. Let's go. The longer we stay here, the harder it'll be to get to your ship. Velora nodded, her resolve hardening. Together, they slipped out of the bunker, moving cautiously through the rocky terrain. As they approached the crash site, Velora spoke again, her voice low but firm. Ethan, if we fail, you must leave me behind. You have risked too much already. Ethan shot her a sharp look. Not happening. We're in this together, Velora. For a moment, her regal mask faltered, replaced by a flicker of emotion. Then let us succeed, she said. They reached the wreckage, the charred remains of Velora's ship looming before them. With enemies closing in and time running out, the two prepared for the next challenge, together. The rebel ships were no longer overhead, but the distant rumble of their engines was still a constant reminder of the danger that loomed. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Ethan and Velora crouched behind a ridge, watching the wreckage of her ship. It lay in pieces, a twisted heap of metal and sparking wires. We have to fix this, Ethan said quietly, his eyes scanning the wreckage. If I can get the main power conduit up and running, we can at least get the engine started. Velora's gaze flickered over the broken ship. We do not have much time. They will return soon, and if they find us, we'll make it work. Ethan cut in, more determined than ever. I've repaired worse. Velora looked at him, her heart heavy. She had led armies, fought battles, and ruled a vast empire, but standing here with Ethan, this simple human who had done more for her than anyone in her life, made her feel something unfamiliar. Why do you risk so much for me? She asked softly. Ethan turned to her, his green eyes steady. Because you're not just a queen, Velora. You're a person, and people matter. Even if it costs me, I'm not going to leave you out here alone. She was silent for a moment, her chest tightening at the sincerity in his words. And what of your life? Are you willing to throw it away? Ethan smiled faintly. I've seen enough of the galaxy to know that if I don't fight for what's right, no one else will. Velora studied him for a long time, and for the first time she didn't see a human or a rebel or an enemy. She saw someone who shared the same values she held dear: honor, loyalty, and the will to survive, no matter the cost. Then I will not leave you either, Velora said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's eyes softened, and for a moment, the war and the danger around them seemed to fade. They were two people, fighting for something that mattered, and that was enough. Together, they moved toward the wreckage. Ethan knelt by the ship's damaged power core, his hands quick and steady as he worked. Valora stayed by his side, watching him closely. The fire of determination burned in both of them, even as the sound of rebel ships returned in the distance. As Ethan worked, Valora's mind raced. She had never allowed herself to depend on others before, let alone trust someone outside her own empire. Yet, standing here beside Ethan, she felt a strange peace she hadn't known in years. The repair took longer than expected, but with each passing minute, the ship's power core began to hum back to life. The engines sputtered and sparked, but it was enough. Ethan looked up at Valora, a grin spreading across his face. "It's working. We're ready to go." Valora's face softened, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe it. They might just make it out of this. Ethan stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "Let's get moving before they find us." Valora nodded, feeling a sense of resolve settle in her chest. She might have abandoned her throne, but she had gained something much more important: a chance at freedom and love. As they made their way to the ship's cockpit, the ground trembled beneath them. The rebels were closing in, but Ethan and Valora didn't hesitate. They climbed into the ship, and Ethan powered it up, the engines roaring to life. The ship lifted off the ground, slowly at first, then gaining speed as they soared into the sky. Valora looked out the window, her heart pounding. She was leaving everything behind: the throne, the empire, and the responsibilities that had weighed on her for so long. But in this moment, with Ethan by her side, it didn't matter. She was free. The stars ahead beckoned them, a new future waiting. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The past was gone, and their journey was just beginning. The ship shot through the sky, its engines purring as the stars stretched out before them. Valora sat beside Ethan in the cockpit, her eyes scanning the stars, her mind still racing. She was freed from the Empire, but the weight of her decision had yet to fully sink in. Ethan, focused on piloting, glanced at her. "You all right?" Valora didn't answer right away, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and uncertainty. "I've never been free, Ethan. I've never made a choice for myself until now." Ethan nodded, his grip steady on the controls. "It's a lot to take in, but you made the right choice." Valora gave him a small smile. "Did I?" He didn't answer right away, instead adjusting the ship's course. No one's ever certain about the right choice. You just have to go with what feels right. And from where I'm standing, you did what you had to do. For a moment, the cockpit was silent except for the hum of the ship. But that silence didn't last. Suddenly, a sharp warning sound blared across the dashboard. Ethan's hand moved quickly, hitting buttons to analyze the incoming signal. "They're here," he muttered. Valora's heart skipped a beat. The rebels. Ethan's face was grim. "They found us." The ship was rocked by a blast, jolting them both in their seats. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We've got company." Valora's silver eyes glinted with resolve. "We can't outrun them, can we?" Ethan shook his head, focusing on the controls. "Not with their ships gaining on us. We'll need to fight back." Valora's heart pounded as she looked out the window, seeing the rebel ships closing in. She had been a ruler, a strategist, but now she was just another fighter, thrown into a battle she hadn't planned for. But her instincts kicked in. "What's the plan?" Ethan's voice was steady as he began to turn the ship into a defensive position. "We need to take down their lead ship. If we can disable their communications, we'll have a chance." Valora nodded, her mind already working. "I'll assist with the weapons. You focus on flying." As the rebel ships closed in, the first volley of blasts came toward them. Ethan maneuvered the ship with sharp turns, narrowly avoiding the blasts. The rebel ships were fast and relentless, but Ethan's quick reflexes gave them a slight advantage. "You'll need to be quick," he warned as another round of fire shook the ship. Valora's hands flew to the weapons panel, her heart racing. She had commanded warriors, But this was different. This was her chance to protect not only herself, but Ethan as well. Her fingers danced across the controls, targeting the nearest rebel ship. A blast of energy shot from the ship's cannons, hitting one of the enemy ships directly. It exploded in a burst of fire and sparks. Ethan let out a relieved breath. Nice shot. But there was no time to celebrate. The remaining rebels were closing in, angrier and more determined. Ethan glanced over at Valora, his eyes sharp. We can't afford to let them corner us. We need to make a break for it. Valora met his gaze, nodding. I'll cover you. As the enemy ships drew closer, Valora fired again, this time hitting one of the pursuing ship's engines. The ship spiraled out of control, crashing into the nearby asteroid field. With the rebels distracted, Ethan took the opportunity to push the ship to its maximum speed. Hold on, he warned as they dove toward the open space ahead. The rebel ships continued to chase, but with their numbers thinning, they couldn't keep up. Valora kept firing, hitting another ship that tried to break their formation. Just a little further, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the chaos. The last rebel ship broke off, retreating as it realized the fight was lost. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. We did it, he said, his grip loosening on the controls. Valora sat back, her heart still racing. She looked at Ethan, her expression softening. Thank you, she said quietly. Ethan smiled. I told you we could do it. The ship drifted into open space, the stars ahead shining brightly. For the first time since the beginning of their journey, Valora allowed herself to relax, knowing that the battle was over, for now. But even as they flew toward an uncertain future, she knew one thing: she wasn't alone. And that made all the difference. The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of possibilities. Ethan and Valora sat side by side in the cockpit, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound between them. The tension from the battle had faded, but the weight of their decisions still hung in the air. For Valora, the universe felt different now. Larger, more open, yet somehow more uncertain. She had been a queen, bound by duty and tradition. But now, she was a woman on the run, forging a new path. The world she had known was gone, and the life she had once lived was a distant memory. Ethan glanced at her, sensing her inner turmoil. You okay? Valora took a deep breath, looking out the window at the endless expanse of space. It's strange, she said softly, to be free, to not have the weight of a crown pressing on my head. Ethan nodded, understanding more than she realized. I can imagine, but you're not alone anymore. You've got me, and I'm not going anywhere. She turned to look at him, her silver eyes searching his face. And what of you, Ethan Ryder? What will you do now that you are no longer just helping a queen escape? He chuckled, the sound light and easy. Maybe I'll help you find a new kingdom. Or maybe we just see where the stars take us. I'm not too worried about the details right now. Valora's lips curved into a faint smile. She hadn't expected such an answer. Most humans would have demanded more, wanted something in return. But Ethan wasn't like that. He was different. I thought you might be, she said quietly. The silence that followed was comfortable, a shared understanding passing between them. For the first time in a long while, Valora felt a sense of peace. There was no empire to rule, no enemies to face, only the unknown ahead. A journey that they would take together. The ship's radar beeped, breaking the moment. Ethan quickly glanced at the screen. Looks like we're not alone, he said, frowning. Valora straightened, her instincts kicking in. Rebels? No, it's a friendly ship. Ethan's fingers moved quickly over the controls, bringing up the ship's data. It's a transport vessel, human-made. Valora's brow furrowed. A transport? What do they want with us? Ethan's fingers paused over the controls. Let's find out. He keyed in a message to the ship, his voice calm. This is Ethan Ryder aboard the Aurora. What's your business? There was a pause before a voice crackled through the speaker. This is Captain Zara of the Sparrow. We've been tracking you since the battle. We noticed you took down the rebel fleet. Impressive work. Ethan exchanged a glance with Valora. We didn't exactly go looking for trouble, but it seems to have followed us. We're not here to cause more, Captain Zora continued. We've been watching the rebellion for a while. We could use people like you, Valora. Valora's heart skipped. You know who I am. Captain Zora's voice softened. We know all about you, and we think it's time for you to lead again, this time on your terms. Ethan looked at Valora, his expression thoughtful. Seems like they're offering you a chance to make a difference. No throne, no empire, just what you want to build. Valora's mind raced. This wasn't what she had expected. She had left her throne behind to escape the weight of it all. But now, there was a chance, an opportunity to rebuild, to lead not as a queen but as someone who could create something better. She looked at Ethan, his face filled with encouragement. Do you think I can do it? Ethan smiled. I know you can. You've got more strength than any empire could ever give you. For the first time, Valora allowed herself to consider a future beyond the throne, beyond the empire. A future where she was free to shape her own destiny. I'll think about it, she said softly. As the sparrow drew closer, Valora felt the weight of her past lifting, replaced by a new sense of purpose. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to face it head-on. And as the stars stretched before them, she knew that whatever the future held, she wouldn't face it alone. Together, she and Ethan would build something new, something that was theirs and theirs alone. The ship flew on, into the unknown, as the first glimmer of a new beginning sparkled on the horizon.